listening to The Next Stop Is with Jane August, where we are learning about my favorite things in New York City from the people who make them. And if you're like me, you are currently dreaming of summer. I want to feel the ocean breeze while I wait in my above-ground subway platform. I want to have a piagua from the ladies in Prospect Park, and I want to be at an outdoor concert so badly. And we have so many great options to do so in New York City, like everyone's favorite venue, Forest Hill Stadium. It is one of the most historic venues in the city. It's located at the West Side Tennis Club in Forest Hills, Queens. You get off the train at Forest Hills and feel like you're in a little European village. It is so not what you imagine when we say New York City. The story of the stadium started over 100 years ago. In 1915, the U.S. Open, which is the premier tennis tournament in the United States, moved to the West Side Tennis Club in Forest Hills. And to accommodate an event of that size, they built Forest Hills Stadium, which opened in the 1920s with the purpose to be a tennis stadium. It wasn't until about 40 years later that they started booking concerts. In the 60s, the stadium became home to the Forest Hills Music Festival, which ran for about a decade. Basically, every big act played there. Barbra Streisand, the Rolling Stones, Frank Sinatra, the Supremes, Judy Garland, Harry Belafonte, and then, of course, the Beatles. And it became legend that they landed their helicopter on the tennis courts and then ran on stage to play the show. But in the late 70s, the U.S. Open moved to the USTA National Tennis Center in Flushing Meadows. Without the U.S. Open, Forest Hills no longer had these huge crowds coming in. And while the tennis club continued to use the stadium, it wasn't to the scale it once was. So after that, it fell into some disrepair. In the late aughts, there was even a proposed plan to demolish the stadium and build luxury condos there instead. But in 2013, a true revival took place and the stadium became a dedicated music venue. It has since become a favorite venue for artists and fans alike, and for me, it has a very special place in my heart. My first music job ever, and I think my first legal job ever, was at Forest Hill Stadium when I was 19 years old. I was an usher, and I just fell in love with everything about this place. And this serves as a disclaimer that I have worked at the stadium and for Madison House Presents, Live Nation, AEG, and the Bowery Presents, all which we'll probably talk about during today's episode, so I'm just letting you know that those biases are present. But overall, it is a very historic and wonderful venue, and today I have the utmost pleasure of chatting with the brain behind the operation, Mike Luba, who helped conceive the revival of the stadium. And in a way, he's like my boss's boss's boss, so this is a really big get for me. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I'm so excited to have you here and to talk about the stadium, but also you do a lot beyond that. So, what are your jobs? I feel like you have a million titles.
I have a bunch of jobs. I, as you know, work on the stadium. I work on a bunch of global touring projects with other artists. And I manage a band called the String Cheese Incident for the last 29 years.
Whoa, that's a long time.
Yeah.
And so how did you get into the music space? How did you build your career to where you are now?
When I was in college, I booked all the music for the school and I applied for a gig with the agency that I booked most of the music. And I was also looking at going to law school, but I was sure I would get this gig as a booking agent, booking frat gigs for kind of unknown bands. And they kind of blew me off to the point where I was literally walking out the door of my house to mail my deposit check into the law school because they called and said, look, man, you're taking up a spot. And as I was walking out the door, the phone rang and it was the folks at Cellar Door in Virginia Beach saying, come up here for an interview. And I did. And I missed the deadline to go to law school. So I went to Virginia and showed up at this job interview. And I walked in the room and there were like 12 people sitting around a big conference table. And I was wearing a kind of like ratty baseball hat on backwards. And the guy who was running the interview turned to me and said something to the effect of like, son, I was always told it wasn't a good idea to show up at a job interview with your hat on backwards unless you want to be a baseball umpire. And I was like, holy shit, they're not going to give me this job. I turned down going to law school and I'm unemployed and have nothing going on. But it turned out they were just with me and they handed me an old school Rolodex. Do you know what a Rolodex is?
I do know what a Rolodex is.
So they gave me a Rolodex and I sat in a cubicle and I called the house phones in fraternities across the Southeast, trying to get them to book Dave Matthews, Hootie and the Blowfish, a whole crew of bands. Like I literally couldn't get Dave Matthews a gig for $1,000 at the University of Virginia to save my life. But it was an incredible learning experience because it was just literally brutal, borderline cold calling moronic frat guys who were, 6 months younger than I was trying to talked them into booking bands.
So unique. And were there any artists that inspired you to kind of take that path that made you really love music?
I oddly was one of those kids who went to band camp my whole life, and I realized I liked as much as I loved playing music, I was not great at it, and I was much better at this part of it.
And then you were doing booking. What made you pivot more towards live music that got you into the stadium?
So the stadium came much later.
Yeah, there was probably a bunch that came between that, right?
Yeah. So the short version of a very long story is I worked at Cellar Door for 2 or 3 years, kind of learning the ropes of the nitty gritty of it. I then moved to Athens, Georgia, and started a company called Madison House. And then over time, I realized that, anytime I farmed something out to someone else, it would get up. And our team was really good at things up. So it was better to just be accountable to ourselves. So over the next 10 or 15 years, we ended up going from a small little booking agency to having a management company, a ticketing company, a travel agency, a graphic designs company, a record label, basically anything that would touch an artist's life. Somehow we created teams around it to help those artists. But it wasn't part of any like genius master plan. It was like self-defense more than anything.
Yeah, it was kind of you'd work with one person and be like, oh, we could probably do this ourselves. Let's just do it ourselves.
Yeah. So it went from me and my original partner who moved from Ohio to start this thing in Georgia. And we got up to like 40-ish folks working for us. And we then moved to Boulder, Colorado to be closer to the string cheese guys. And we did that for a stretch. And then kind of half the company wanted to come to New York and half kind of wanted to stay in Boulder. So we opened an office in New York and half the company moved to New York, half stayed in Boulder. And then one day, this is 20 years into it, I got a call at my desk from a guy named Michael Cole, who really is credited with creating the whole concept of global touring. He was the first guy who took the Rolling Stones out globally as one promoter around the world. And he called me and said, hey, I've been watching what you've done at Madison House for the last few years. I'm about to take over as the chairman of Live Nation. We're going to build out a whole division called Artist Nation. And I'd like you to come run it in Florida. At which point I thought I was getting punked, and it was a buddy of mine who ran the Fox Theater in Boulder. So I basically said, F you, Don. And I hung up on him. And the phone rang back, and it was Michael again. And this time he had Bob Ezrin, who was Pink Floyd's producer and did all the great Kiss records. And he's like, don't hang up on me. It's really me. And here's Bob Ezrin. He's going to run the record side. You're going to run the live side. And we're going to change the way everyone does everything. So I moved to Florida and we started Artist Nation. And we did that for a couple of years. And then all sorts of wacko things happened. And Michael ended up leaving to start his own company. And I went with him. And we did that for a few years. And it was kind of at the tail end of that where my main mission, really what I loved the most, was I worked with bands all over the world where they had ridiculous ideas or things that were logistically really tricky or financially not feasible, but for some reason really important to them. We would figure out a way to make it happen. So I have this giant book of like weird places to play gigs. And one day I got a call from Thomas Mars from Phoenix, who Phoenix had been to New York. They had sold out the Garden. And he was like, can you find us somewhere weird to play in New York next time we come through? And at that point, I cold called the pro shop at the West Side Tennis Club. And the head pro at the time happened to answer the phone. And he said, I have no idea who you are, what the hell you're talking about, but your timing is pretty good because after decades, the board of the West Side Tennis Club finally decided that over their dead body, would they ever sell the stadium, which had been a very real possibility for a very long time. And that started this whole going on 12-year rabbit hole of lunacy.
Wow.
that you know so well.
Yeah. Because it was like they had the whole proposal to try to turn it into condominiums. And so that was at the same time that they said no, and that's when you called?
Yeah. So the club is like 120 something years old at this point, and they're still governed by the same bylaws. And in order to sell the property, they needed to get a super majority of the members physically in a room to vote. And I think the average age of the membership at that time was between 80 and 90.
Oh, wow.
And they literally couldn't get enough people in the room to ever vote. But when they did do like a straw poll on it, it came within like 2 or 3 votes where had it come to pass, the stadium could have been sold. And there's full renderings from Cord Meyer of what the condominium would have looked like and all this crazy stuff. But simultaneously within the tennis club, there was a very real preservationist movement who were like, look, you can't knock down this stadium that's the birthplace of all of American tennis, was so critical to so many important moments in pop culture that you, the rest of the membership, over our dead body. And it was kismet. I literally happened to call the week that they threw themselves in front of the developers. I'm like, you can't have it. And we started with one show with Mumford and Sons, who I had spent the whole previous year kind of pitching them on the idea because two of those guys are from Wimbledon in England, and Forest Hills was the American equivalent of Wimbledon. So I kept pitching them like, guys, could you imagine if you could, play a gig at Wimbledon? And they looked at me like I was an idiot the entire time. And I finally dragged one of the guys from the band when they were in New York out to see the stadium, which at that point really hadn't been touched in decades. And there were trees growing out of compost piles in the bowl, and it was a mess. And the guy took one look at it and turned to me and was like, hey, mate, this is nothing like Wimbledon. This is a total hole. If you can make it safe, we can come to a rock show here. And that's how the whole thing started.
So it was all about booking the show. And then at one point, did you realize, oh, we should make this like a venue that's ongoing instead of just like a show for Phoenix, a show for Mumford?
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely, we weren't reinventing anything. The place had a spectacular, epic history of doing it, and we knew that somewhere in the DNA of the place, there was a right way to bring it back to life. Unfortunately, the very first show, we kind of did everything wrong. But it only took us one show. And once we got through the first show, we knew where the stage had to go, where the bathrooms had to go, where the gate should go. We put in seats, we reduced the capacity, we created aisles, we did, all the things to make it proper. But that first show, we refunded almost $400,000 worth of tickets.
Whoa.
And we weren't sure if we would come back for a second show, but we knew what to do. So at that point, we kind of doubled down on it. We bought the stage, which miraculously fit, and we taught the club in the city into letting us put it up. And, the next year we did 5 shows. And then the next year we did 9 shows. And then the next year we did 12 shows. And then we got up to 16 shows for a while. And then COVID hit. And then we came back, and now we're kind of at the 30-ish shows a season, which feels about right. It's enough. The biggest trick is, as you know, the place runs 100% based on the people who work there.
Mm-hmm.
So if we go much lower than the kind of 30 number, it just becomes not viable for the kind of world-class people who work there to be able to commit to it, because they need to work the other 330 days of the year.
Yeah.
So hopefully that's the sweet spot where it's worth people's time to stay vested and committed to the stadium, but it's not overwhelming for the vast majority of the neighborhood and the tennis club and the community at large.
Yeah, so we're 12 years into this now, essentially.
Yeah.
What parts of it are you really proud of? Are there any like dream ideas or artists that you had at the beginning that have come to fruition?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's funny. Almost all of them. I was talking to Don Sullivan, who's my partner on this, and we're kind of down to the last 2 or 3 bucket list folks. But yeah, it's gone way beyond my wildest dreams and expectations and hopes. So
who was on that list to begin with?
Neil Young was the kind of pipe dream that happened last year. Dave Matthews was a big one for me. That was a full 30-year full circle moment when he kind of got me into the music business. I booked his first show ever in Atlanta at the college I went to for $1,200. And then almost to the day, 30 years later, was when he played Forest Hills.
That's so sweet.
Yeah, we're, outside of like Pearl Jam, Metallica, McCartney, Billy Joel, we've kind of, it's, if you look back at the 100 and something shows we've done, I'm pretty proud of them. They're all pretty good.
Everyone always seems to be amazed by who we have. And
yeah, I can tell you this year, the 10-year chase with fish finally came to fruition. So that's particularly satisfying for me because that one was hand-to-hand combat with the band for 10 years.
Yeah, when I saw that, I was like, Luba's gonna have the best shows of his life this summer at Fish.
Yeah,
I'm
for
excited
sure.
to meet everyone's dads because everyone's dad's gonna come to Fish.
I'm telling you that it hit the exact sweet spot of Forest Hills people. So yeah, the demand for it is completely bonkers. They could probably do 10 or 12 nights if they had the time.
So why do you think that both fans and artists love the stadium so much? I feel like every band wants to play here and everyone in town says it's their favorite venue.
I think it's because the place is inherently, I don't want to sound like an idiot, but there's some sort of like inherent magic to it. It holds, as you know, it holds almost 14,000 people, but when you stand on stage, it feels like a 6,000 seater or a 7,000 seater. And I think that's because it was built to watch little people playing tennis before electricity was a thing. So wherever you were, you had to be able to see it and hear it. And then Forest Hills itself is so weird and kind of like a time out of place neighborhood. So I think for years it was, people would get off the train or the subway, cross under the Long Island Railroad track, and then all of a sudden you're in Forest Hills Gardens and you're like, where the hell am I? And how does this place exist 14 minutes outside of Manhattan or 20 minutes from Williamsburg? It's funny, for the first 6 or 7 years after work every day, I would go out to Queens Boulevard and I would stop the first 100 people I would run into and I would ask, hey, have you ever heard of the stadium in Forest Hills? And for years, the answer would be, no, what are you talking about? And I was 2 blocks away from the stadium at that point. And then over time, people started to be, yeah, we know where it is. And then I would ask, could you point me to it? Which they couldn't. And now I would go, and if I did it today, I would probably go 100 for 100. Everyone knows it and can actually tell me where it is, which is, it was very organic the way we kind of spread the word about it. It took a long time.
It's beloved by so many people in the neighborhood, but recently there's been a group of folks in the neighborhood who aren't for the stadium and decided to sue. Like, why is that happening amongst everyone who loves it?
For me, the best analogy is kind of like what the Freedom Caucus did to the United States Congress. We got a small handful of people with a very specific agenda willing to put their agenda ahead of the will of everyone else. And that's what's happened here. We have a handful, maybe, of very vocal people on like a jihad who hate the tennis club or hate the stadium. To put him in perspective, there's a woman who's been collecting a petition for 8 years that finally had a few hundred people on it. Some of it was like in crayon. People would sign it because they were sick of being harassed by her. And one of the local politicians was like, hey, it'd be really helpful if you guys put out a petition so we could stand up and be like, look, there's an equal amount of people who like it that don't like it. So we circulated a petition. I asked her what the dream number, if we could deliver signatures, or her what a home run would be. She's like, if you can get 1,500 people, 2,000 people on it, it would be incredible, because normally the ratio of signatures to actual people is something like 20 to 1. And in 2.5 days, 25,000 people signed the thing.
Wow.
With 70% of them being in the 2 zip codes right around the stadium, to the point where the politicians then came to us, were like, can you please stop the petition, because our office is being destroyed by phone calls from people outraged that there's even a chance of something happening to their beloved stadium. But this is not a unique or interesting phenomenon. This happens to almost every venue in every city in every country. What's particularly frustrating about this is that Forest Hills Gardens was the first master plan neighborhood in America. And in the master plan at the turn of the century, they included a stadium that's now 102 years old. So sometimes in my other jobs, we go in and we build nightclubs or concert halls and we mess up people's lives because they had lived there forever. We changed the neighborhood. But there's not one person alive in Forest Hills who was here before the stadium. And certainly there's not one person who wasn't aware of the fact that they were moving into a neighborhood that did have what was at one time a functional giant stadium. And the level of insanity is, one of the key anti-stadium guys called me one day. He's like, I believe that I am the most impacted because my apartment is closest to the stadium. And I'm like, John, when did you move here? He's like, I moved here in 1994. And I'm like, well, your building is called Tennis View Apartments. You don't want to live in an apartment that has a view of the tennis. Like, move one block over and you won't see us or hear us or even know we exist. But if you're going to move into the corner apartment of Tennis View Apartments, I don't know what to tell you. It's like people who move next to an airport and are that there are airplanes flying over.
So, what can music fans do to help the stadium with this fight against these few people that want to take it down?
We're trying pretty hard not to let the toxic spiral begin because it's so easy for this thing to just turn into a gross knife fight where there's really no need for it. But at some point, the neighbor, basically this one guy hijacked the Forest Hills Gardens Corporation, which is the HOA that we worked with the entire time, hand in hand with. It had no problems until this one single guy took over. And he basically told us to our face his mission was to get rid of the West Side Tennis Club and with it the stadium. We're still at it with them. And there's this group called the Concerned Citizens of Forest Hills, which is made up of 3 or 4 people. And they showed up the first year. And the second year, I got a call from the cops. And they're like, Luba, you got to hear this. And I guess they record every call that comes into the police station. And on the tape, the guy goes, hey, it's so-and-so from 11 Dartmouth Street. The concert's blowing the windows out of my house and my pictures are falling off the wall. And the desk cop is like, sir, it's 1:00 in the afternoon. There's not a concert happening at the stadium right now. And on the tape, you can hear him go, God damn it, Helen, I told you we shouldn't call from France. It's literally the same guy and his wife 10 years later playing the same game of whack-a-mole with us. But it's in the courts now. The judge has thrown out everything that's been brought against us so far. So hopefully we're approaching the end of this cycle. And again, it's not anything new. This exact case happened in 1968. There was an angry neighbor. They litigated. They said the stadium was a nuisance, and the judge threw it out. So it's just really frustrating because it's a gigantic waste of time and energy and money that's now going to lawyers that probably should be going back into the neighborhood.
Yeah, hopefully that's over soon, especially because summer's so close with the season starting. May 31st is the first show, right?
Yep.
With Block Party?
Yep.
I'm so excited for. Are there any things that we should be looking forward to this season? Obviously, besides like fish, are there any things in the work that you can tell us about like stadium changes or just lineups?
I don't want to ruin the surprise for anyone, but I'm very much looking forward to the return of All Things Go, which is going to expand to 3 days this year.
Whoa.
And the lineup for that looks incredible. Yeah, this one's going to be a good season. I wasn't sure when we started how it was going to turn out, but it's going to be good. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yay. And then in addition to doing the stadium, you manage String Cheese Incident and you have a Grammy and you work for Live Nation and you're on the board for Reverb. How do you do it all? Like, what's your day-to-day look like with all these projects?
I spend a load of time sitting in front of a computer and on the phone. I literally just crank calls and Zooms all day long. Wow. And then I go out on the road and try to do it from the road, which is really tricky. So I'm trying to stay off the road as much as possible.
When was the last time you went on the road?
I went to see the String Cheese guys in Chicago a couple weeks ago, which was nice. A bunch of the bands that I've worked with for a long time are all going to be out on the road starting in March. So I have like one more week, and then Nathaniel Rateliff is out on the road. He's going to come back and sell out the Garden, which is really exciting. Mumford & Sons is going to go back out. The kids in Goose, I'm really proud of and are crushing it everywhere they go. So I try to help them the little bit I can. Yeah, I am a very lucky person. And any of the grief or problems I have are truly like first world luxury problems, considering what's going on in the world.
I feel like every day at work, I'm like, I get to work in music and be around people who are so happy to be there and see what work we're doing that I'm like, okay, someone being like upset with me about something minor is really like nothing of importance.
Yeah, I mean, that's the magic of, I don't know that there are many other jobs where at the end of it, you have, 10,000 people cheering and you know that you were somehow some small part of it.
I feel like right now the live music industry is changing so much. Are there any trends that you're really liking and some that you aren't that you'd want to share?
I think the push towards transparency and ticketing is going to be a good thing ultimately for everyone. It seems like the drinking patterns have changed a lot in terms of beer and booze seem to be less important to people, which is good in a lot of ways, but also tricky in a lot of ways because the way the music kind of modern music business is set up is that the bands take all the money and then the venues kind of live on the beer and peanuts. So we'll see. But I'm super encouraged. There's a lot of really amazing young musicians making incredible music and older musicians still that are super vital and making great music. And if I don't want to jinx us, but it feels like things have gotten. When I first started, it was a little bit of the Wild West, and I was just catching the end of the Wild West music business phase. So now everything feels very adult and safe,
Mm.
which is good. It's really good. We take it really seriously, and the music business as an industry is young compared to other kind of industries at this scale. It's really been around for 50, 60 years. So it's just a baby. But a lot of the dumb that used to just be scary and dangerous, we figured out to stop doing. So now really the focus is always how do we make sure that the fans and the bands and the crew are safe and happy and healthy first, which certainly was not the case for a long time.
You were mentioning artists that you're excited for. What are your favorite artists right now that we should be keeping an eye out for?
I love again, they're not new, but I think what King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard is doing is groundbreaking. I'm really proud of what folks like Phoebe Bridgers and Lucy Dacus and Julian Baker, and there's tons of strong female, non-binary, LGBTQ. Just it feels like the music scene has become way more inclusive or out front in being inclusive. And it's something at Forest Hills we really consciously work on, that we were aware early on that if we weren't careful, we would just end up booking a bunch of old white guys with guitars. So there was, for a period of time, there was the joke of if the band had too many old white guys with guitars, we just wouldn't do it.
I know you have to go, so I have like one last question that I've been asking all my guests, which is what's been bringing you joy lately?
I am super lucky in that I have an incredible wife and two kids that I'm super proud of and in love with. My son's in college, my daughter's a sophomore. So watching them kind of turn into functional adults has been incredible.
Nice. That's
And
a
they,
wonderful answer.
yeah, I know. As I was saying, I'm like, my God, it sounds so corny and canned, but it's really, truly true.
Are
And I don't
they?
take it for granted because I know, it's hard having kids, raising kids.
Yeah, especially with all that you do. I'm like, how do you balance it all? How do you do all the jobs you have plus raise kids?
Yeah, when they were little, I was on the road a lot, and I kind of had a self-imposed rule that I would try never to be gone for more than 3 days, which led to lots of like flights that left at 1 in the morning or 6 in the morning. And then I would be a total vegetable when I was home. So I was no good to the kids or my wife at that point. And my wife's a super high powered woman who has her own going on. So just trying to figure out what that balance was took a long time, but it's doable.
Yeah, you're doing it and you're making it look easy.
Oh, I appreciate that.
So that's all I have. Is there anything else that you'd like to share before you have to go?
I mean, I hope you know this, but just you and the folks at the stadium who share your attitude and vibe are what makes the magic happen more than the bands, more than the building, more than anything. It's really, I'm so proud of the people who work there and the way they treat people. And it just sets the tone. And back to your earlier question, that's why people truly love coming to Forest Hills. It's just, it's a tangible, noticeably different vibe than anywhere else in the world, really. And I've been in the shows at 140 countries, something like that. And on a good night, there's nowhere like Forest Hills anywhere.
That was so wonderful. Thank you, Mike Luba, for being on the podcast. Forest Hills Stadium starts their season on May 31st with Block Party, which is one of my favorites. It's going to be such a great time. There are so many shows that have yet to be announced, and you can buy tickets at foresthillsstadium.com. Summer is so close, and I'm so excited for it. This has been The Next Stop Is with Jane August. You can follow me, Jane, at Jane August on Instagram and TikTok. The Next Stop is recorded at Brick House in downtown Brooklyn. It premieres on Brooklyn Free Speech Radio. You can listen to other episodes in the same place you're listening to this one.